Well, we're like a month later and clear across the country in Florida now from when I said I would get back to the Alaska video here. And I'm going to try and battle my little beast here who's trying to discuss. But we'll kind of pick up where we were. Obviously, I'm a writer, not a content provider, I guess. But excuse me. So when we left off, we had reached Alaska, having gone there through Acme, Washington, up through, we went up through Vancouver, on up to Prince George, to Smithers, Dease Lake. We were in Whitehorse, in the Yukon. I'll try and document some of this. We'll give a little map tour of the way up there. But really, the story began about the time we got to Alaska. We got to the Alaskan border on the Alaska Highway. We had taken the Stewart-Casher Highway up to the Yukon and to the Alaska Highway, and now we were getting ready to go into the state and go into a campground in the small town of Tok. Tok is spelled T-O-K, and it's pronounced Tok. You'll hear me talk about Tok a fair amount, and you'll also hear me talk about Tuk, which is Tuktoyaktuk, which is up in the north and the end point of our ride to the Arctic Ocean. But we rode into Tok on the Alaska Highway after passing the Alaska border, and this is probably the first time that the Alaska Highway was really cruddy. When we went up the Stewart-Casher, I was told that, this is the way to go because it's, not as kept up and all of that, but really it seemed like the Alaska Highway was in worse shape, and specifically when we crossed the border heading on into Tok. A lot of frost heaves. I mean, this little one was like airborne over and over. I kept looking in the mirror to make sure she was still there, although she does have a tether. That sounds good. We rode across this gravel construction, frost heaves, potholes, and the biggest problem was that if you're riding on that kind of surface, especially the gravel, you want to keep up some speed, and there was so many places where we were faced with pilot cars doing like 15 miles an hour, which really messed with the stability. But anyway, got to Tok and to Thompson's Eagle Claw Campground. Thompson's Eagle Claw is probably one of the really, really unique campgrounds in the motorcycling community. I have a strong love for Cycle Camp, Johnny Forks, Washington, and I'll push that all the time. But Thompson's Eagle Claw is in many ways similar. It's set up for motorcyclists only. It has a shop, it has a sauna, it has good cooking facilities, and although it has a lot of normal campsites, one of the things that's neat about it, it has some very themed camping opportunities. There's a school bus that you can camp in. There is an ambulance that you can camp in. There are numerous cabins, one of which we stayed in, that are themed in different ways. So it's just a lot of fun. And Nessa, who runs the place and who basically carved it out by hand, is an incredibly wonderful character and well worth meeting. So we spent the night at Tok, and then our goal was to head on over to go to Seward, Fairbanks, Kenai Peninsula. Now my brother, this is what the trip was about, was getting together with my brother, but he wasn't going to be available for another week, and his son Joe, that was going with us, was going to come up at that time. And although at that time he was 200 miles away from me, and I don't see my brother that often, excuse me, I'm being eaten here. Don't disrupt my thoughts. As I don't see my brother that often, he was saying, it's worth it to go to Seward. It's worth it to go to Fairbanks. To Anchorage, and to go to the Kenai Peninsula. But initially, we were looking at just riding down there, and he said, "No, you want to take the Denali Highway. You don't want to just drive direct on the road." So there was some discussion of that, and I kept trying to say, my brother knows this area. Let's do that. And we did, and it was probably one of the best choices that I could have made, and I'll get into that in a minute. But the first night we left Tok, We found another campground at Paxton Lake, and we found that the lake had ice floating in it, and this was the first lake we'd seen like that. So we obviously took the opportunity to, strip down and dive into the water because it was there. So the next day we woke up, we drove up to the Denali Highway, and we were greeted with a sign that was mentioning that it had just opened, and it said specifically on there, travel on this roadway is not advised. So we kind of went, Yahoo! At this time, I got to say that this was a changer for me. Willie was up there with his KTM 1190, which he just dearly loves, and the 145 horsepower and the raw speed and blah blah blah. It was a wonderful bike. Nick was up on a CTX 650, I believe it is. A semi-automatic with the notable feature being the frunk, which is a front trunk under where the gas tank would normally be, and the gas tank in the back. Nick had a very cool bike. Really not that suited, but he's a wild rider. That's why he was, full throttle Nicky as far as William was concerned. As far as I was concerned, it was Nicky's shoulders, because every time I looked up, he was on the shoulder, but it didn't seem to bother him at all. He just pulled back on. So anyway, they had some interesting bikes, and I had switched from the Himalayan to the DR, and I honestly had not fallen in love with it yet. I will say it probably does everything better than the Himalayan, aside from ride in the wind. It's horrible in the wind. It's too light and tall. But slow speed, the Himalayan was actually easier. Would go over rock gardens or anything else, because it just had no power and buckets of torque, and it just chugged along like a tractor. And although this sailed across the country and it was absolutely flawless and mechanically good and simple and etc., I wasn't crazy about it yet until we got on the Denali Highway. And we got on that highway, and the potholes were there, and the gravel was there, and the frost heaves were there, and the scenery was there in buckets. It was just absolutely incredible. But we were able to just fly along, and that bike just soaked it up. Potholes became something I didn't, 10 inches of suspension and a 21-inch front wheel, I just sort of quit avoiding things, and we just hauled butt across the Denali Highway, stopping to, soak in views that would just make you bring tears to your eyes. They were just absolutely incredible. So we crossed the Denali Highway, and during that progression across the frost heaves and things, Nick had had built one of the most unusual and innovative racks on the back of his bike that I'd seen, completely cobbled together from a Walmart shopping cart, complete with a little kid's safety strap on it and everything. And he had done a great job. He really loaded it up and done a lot with it, taking it across the whole continent. But it did break on the way there. So it was great. We got to the other side of the Denali Highway after stopping and having some pie midway at one of the small resorts which was just opening up. Which again, my brother recommended that, and it was a good choice, Brian. We appreciate it. So we ate our pie, rode the Denali, and got to the other side and found out that Nick's rack was broken. So we rolled into a gas station, and we're very fortunate in the person running the gas station there had a son-in-law who came out with a welder, and they just put it all back together, and we were good. Willie again that night found us a really nice little camping spot. And aside from the fact that after we set up, we found out there were like 1 million bear and moose tracks around, and that was a little concerning. But we set up branches to make a lot of noise if anything came through, and then I put my motorcycle out by our tent, which has a proximity alarm, so if anything did wander through, it would let us know. So we weren't bothered too much. We were really kind of getting our first taste of the mega mosquitoes, and I've tried to describe how bad the mosquitoes are to various people, and I was talking to somebody the other day, and he described it really well. He says it's like being on the back end of a skill saw and having the sawdust flying in your face. Just excuse me. So anyway, that was quite a thing. We did invest in little units called thermocells, which was a little butane heater. Heat up a chemical, it spreads around the area. I don't know how toxic or good for you it is, but it certainly clears this little bubble where you don't have the mosquitoes. So we spent the night there. Next day we rode around some, but the weather had rolled in Kenai and in Anchorage. I gotta keep my location straight, and it was just not going to be possible to get down there. So we were doing a little local riding, but this time we're like 90 miles from where my brother lived, and I'm going, I'd be happy with go with you guys down to Kenai or wherever, but we're not going to make it there, and I'm not going to just hang around this area. My brother's got a million great rides that we could go on, so I took off and went to Fairbanks, and they stayed for a couple more days and came up. Brian found him a host that was normally not open, but he talked to him and got him a place to, Nick and Willie a place to stay. I was staying in my brother's camper, and we all had a good time in Fairbanks for a few days. Meanwhile, Joe came up. I went through a little debacle with a tire, in that I thought I would get a new tire. I went down and I bought one. Izzy was not happy about sharing space with it on the way back, and when we got back, and we changed it, put air into it, and as soon as it expanded at all, you can see it was cracked all over the place. I will not personally go into the tire company because I'm not big on the old slander, but if anybody wants to know which one to avoid, it was kind of unbelievable to me that they even sold this to me. But they did make it good and get me a different tire, and we were ready to roll in a few days. So after that, we all loaded up and went to Tok again, and from Fairbanks to Tok was about 200 miles. Stopped, had burgers along the way, etc. And we got ready to go to Dawson City. Dawson City was what the trip was initially all about, with myself and my brother and Joe. And we're in Tok that night. At that point, Willie and Nick met up with a guy named Stoyan. Stoyan turned out to be a really great guy, lots of fun, and he would end up going with us out of Dawson City. And I had contacted my friend Silas. Silas has a KLR. I mean, I'll forgive him, but Silas has a KLR, and a very big internet presence with his Instagram page. I'll put a link to that in there. He's doing really well with it. I'm not much on a content provider or influencer or anything like that, but I try to keep up with what I've been doing. Anyway, we all went to Tok, had a nice night there, but during that time, unfortunately, my nephew Joe, Brian's brother, got quite a good stomach ailment going on and was in a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort. And my brother was, upset some because we had planned this trip, but this is his son, and I couldn't fault him or see anything different. So they headed on back to Fairbanks, and we headed over to Dawson City. To get to Dawson City, you went through the town of Chicken and Eagle, Alaska, through another border crossing, and across what they call the Top of the World Highway. Top of the World Highway was spectacular as well. Not as snowy and mountainous as Denali, but you were sort of, as the name would imply, on top of everything, and you could look out and just take it all in. It was absolutely astonishing, wonderful. So then we rolled into Dawson City. There's a ferry crossing to get in there. And all our little groups started to coalesce into this group of 5. I physically met Silas for the first time. And we got a campground, got all set up, and things were looking good. The Dawson event, Dust to Dawson, is an annual event. Started, I think they told me, in 2000. Oh gosh, I don't know. It's been a while back. because I saw stickers from way back. I'm wrong about how long. Anyway, it's been around a while. An annual thing. To get there, you take the top of the World Highway, so it pretty well limits it to adventure bikes. You don't see much else, and in that realm, it's not considered a rally or a gathering. There's nothing really for sale, but it's an incredible old mining town. There are some tremendous traditions. I hope to take part in more next year. There were a number of competitions, slow riding, catching a hot dog with your mouth, riding by, blindfold riding, things like that. We met a young woman who was riding a Yamaha Bolt all the way, Antonia Islas, riding all the way. She had come down from Yucatan, I believe, and was riding the Dempster Highway up to Tuck, and it was quite an impressive thing she was doing. She was with a partner of hers. So we met a lot of good people, a lot of fun people. We met the Kiwis that we had talked to you about earlier down in Prince George, and they were off and running. So we finished the event at Dawson City, and we decided, well, it's time we were going to go up the Dempster Highway. The Dempster Highway used to just go to Inuvik, which is 80 or 100 miles short of the Arctic Ocean, and without a real goal, the Dempster wasn't, the popular one. The Dalton Highway out of Fairbanks to Prudhoe is generally the more known ride north, but it doesn't get you to the Arctic Ocean. It gets you to Prudhoe, and apparently you can take a bus like a tourist the rest of the way. And in 2018, I believe, they opened the Dempster Highway in Northwest Territory all the way to Tuktoyaktuk from Inuvik. And for a couple of years it was kind of flooded, and then COVID came along, and now it's started up again and moving again. So it was great. I talked to several people. We were extremely fortunate because I talked to several people who had attempted that highway 4 or 5, 6 times before they were successful. And you're asking a lot in reliability from your motorcycle. It's 450 miles of dust and mud and dirt and gravel and deeper gravel and even deeper gravel, and a lot of that is maintained as it would or by the road graders, but they tend to plow these furrows in them, so you got deep gravel with ruts and walls and things, so it can be challenging. Much of it is fast packed dirt, and you can move right along, not to make it like it's all really possible or anything, but these sections will come up on you in a hurry. We were very, very fortunately, the base is a calcium chloride, which is a light color when it's dry and turns dark when it gets wet, and is apparently slicker than greased butter. We didn't run into a lot of the wet stuff, even when it sprinkled a little bit. We wanted to avoid the dark spots, but we went on up to Tuktoyaktuk. I'll try and put a bunch of pictures as much as I can in there. I mentioned in the earlier one that I had an entire camera card loss, which was my primary camera. It was like 5 hours of video to take stills from, but we'll try and fill all this in. I was also very fortunate in that Silas with the KLR, which I do again forgive him for owning, had provided me with a lot of footage to fill some of it in. So with that, we'll try and tell the story of the ride up. When we finished the ride up, we came back to Inuvik together. At that point, coming out of there, we were going to go different directions. Silas going home to Tok. Willie and Nick were going to Michigan or Minnesota, I believe, and I was going straight on back down to Seattle. I was going to take the Alaska Highway instead of the Stuart Casher, just to get a feel for both directions. And so I did that. But we left at different times. It was kind of amusing because Stoyan I'd always run kind of with the faster guys. I was in the slower crew. Silas stayed back with me. I don't know, Silas was a lot faster than me, but he was at least kind enough to stay with me and ride along with me. Stoyan seemed a good deal faster, but he would come back and check on us, and it was kind of nice. We didn't feel like we were riding so alone. And it was amusing when we left because Silas left first, and he was just going. He left, hours and hours further. I just woke up earlier than the rest of them and took off several hours before them. And I was down the road, 100, 150 miles, stopped for gas, and Stoyan comes rolling in, and I knew that he'd started long before me, or long after me. And we're talking for a second. I said, getting gas, and he said, yeah, he got tired of eating their dust and just took off. And I'm going, man, how quick is this guy? And I got gas. He said, I wanted to know if he wanted to ride with me. He said no, he was going to go have breakfast, and he was going to be there for a while. So I took off, and I headed on down south again. I stopped at the Arctic Circle, found out that Izzy resembles an Arctic fox, and took some pictures there. And the next thing I know, Stoyan, who had to have been another half hour or more behind when we started, at least with breakfast, went by me, and if he was going 10 miles an hour, he was going 120. And he looked like the road runner disappearing over the hills with the dust behind him. Quite impressive. In fact, I rode the rest of the 300 miles or whatever to the end of the Dempster. I was getting fuel, and that's when Willie and Nick showed up and caught up with me. I knew they were faster than me, but that's an example of how much Stoyan was ahead. I was just floored. But anyway, at that point we went different directions. Willie and Nick went to back to Dawson City, and they were going to go from there. And I went down the Alaska Highway. Not a ton to report on that. It was pretty. Nowhere near as spectacular as the Stuart Casher. The only major difference, there were a lot of buffalo. There are some decent campgrounds. I did run into problems in that I didn't have cash with me, and a lot of the campgrounds, even the campgrounds that wanted money, wanted cash, and hotels wanted cash, and I was getting so tired I was looking towards that, but none of the ATMs seemed to work in the entire Yukon. So I ended up riding like 35 hours on and off, just napping and rolling, napping and rolling. So I was pretty tired. I got down into British Columbia and found a great little campground, and it's a long story. But apparently I had been told that the wolves and the coyotes had been interbreeding in the area, and I ran into the biggest coyote that I had ever seen in my life, and they're generally pretty skittish, and this one was afraid of nothing and coming after Izzy. So I not to be a badass, it was not to die or not get my dog eaten. I actually ran at it with an air horn and a knife, and it didn't really even run away. It kind of looked at me and said, okay, I'll leave, but I'll be back. And it was 3 times, but by then I'd pulled out the bear spray, and it didn't seem to want to mess with us. And when I set out the proximity alarm on my bike that night, it came by another 3 times. So persistent. That was the really only menacing animal issue had on the entire trip. So from there it was nothing major. A lot of road, a lot of highway, and going back into Seattle, into where we started this, into Acme, Washington. So I'll try and I was just sitting here and recorded all this, so I'll try and intersperse the pictures and things as we talk about it. But I appreciate it, and I considered this at the time to be the trip of a lifetime, and I was going to do this with my brother, and that's what the whole event was about. And as I say, unfortunately that didn't happen. So I definitely plan on going back next year, and anybody who wants to talk about doing that, get hold of me. The only caveat I will hold to is that we do this at a slow pace. I really would have preferred going up there to go at a much slower pace, not because it's scary, not because the corners aren't, you know, primo and lots of fun to go racing around on, but because there was so much to see, and it was so breathtaking. And I would love to have. I actually thought about taking the Thumper Thunder to the Tundra thing and having nothing but, you know, DRs and Himalayans, and yes, I suppose a KLR. And KLR's a good bike. I just got to give Silas a bad time. Anyway, that's about all I got to say. So we'll try and get some pictures hooked up with this and present it, and I will try to be a better internet content creator, provider.